Hello everyone, praise the Lord once again. Welcome back to your class on Bible Survey 1 and Old Testament Survey. Okay, so we have already completed the poetical section. Now we are going to enter into the prophetical section of the Old Testament. So without wasting much time, let us jump into the portion that we are going to study for today. So let me just share the screen. Okay, so we are entering into the sixth unit, which is the survey of the prophetical books, and today we are going to deal with the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah, along with the book of Lamentation, because it is assumed or it is said that the book belongs to Jeremiah, so it is associated with Jeremiah. So we are going to study the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, along with the book of Lamentation. Okay, so let's begin. So let's first see the introduction to the prophetical section or the prophetical books. Okay, so as we have already spoken about and discussed many times before in the whole section of the Old Testament survey or the prophet or the Bible survey one, even in the first few classes also, we have seen about the different kinds of canons, that is the Hebrew canon, the Greek canon, and the English that we have today. So according to that, we can see that the Hebrew canon was divided into three parts, and the second part was the section of the prophetical books or the Nebim or the Nevim section, and this section was divided into two parts. Again, that was the former prophets and the latter prophets. So the former prophets consisted of Joshua, Judges, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, as they covered the period of non-writing prophets like Samuel, Elijah, Elisha, Nathan, and so on. Okay, so basically the former prophets were the people who they do not have prophetical books associated with them. Okay, so we have many prophets apart from the 12 plus 4 prophets mentioned in our Bible. So we have many more prophets who are mentioned in the books of Kings and Samuel, and even the Chronicles, and even the books of Joshua, Judges. So we have many prophets associated and spoken about in these books, but they don't have particular books of prophecy or prophetical books written by them or associated with them, which is found in the Bible. So they are known as former prophets. So they are non-writing prophets, like just examples as we have mentioned just now: Samuel, Elijah, Elisha, Nathan. So Samuel does have a book, but his book is in the historical section. It is not the prophetical book as we see of Elijah, of Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel, or some of the minor prophets like Jonah or Joel or some other prophets. Okay, so this is a section where we can see that these prophets are the prophets who do not have prophetical books associated with them, though they have other kinds of books that may be associated with them. Okay, the second section is the latter prophets. So the latter prophets are the prophets who have prophetical books associated with them, or they have written prophetical books, or some prophetical books are credited to their name. Okay, so these are around 15 books of latter prophets in the Hebrew canon. Okay, so you have to remember that Daniel was not a part of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, but it was in the writing section. Okay, so he is not found in the prophetical section. So altogether 12 plus 3, that makes 15 books from Isaiah to Malachi. Okay, so these 15 books are further divided or further subdivided into major and minor prophets. Okay, so the latter prophets are again divided into major and minor prophets. So the terms major and minor are basically not based because not called minor or major because of the importance or the significance of the book, but it is called major or minor based on the size of the book. Okay, size of the book, not on the importance of the book. So when you read the word major prophets, when you read the word minor prophets, it does not mean that their call was anything less or more, that their ministry was anything greater or lesser, that their books were anything more marvelous or more better than the books that have been written by the minor prophets. No, it is nothing like that. It is simply termed major and minor because of the size of the books. So the major prophets, that are the 4 books that we have in English and 3 that we have in the Hebrew, are placed before. That is a major prophet, the bigger ones, and the smaller ones, that is the minor ones, are placed afterwards. So that is the only difference in the major and the minor. There is no difference in the call. There is no difference in the importance of the prophet or his ministry. There is no difference of importance in all those things, but the only difference is in the size of the book. Okay, so remember that for the further references. Okay, so the minor prophets are thus, what do we know? We have already mentioned the major prophets, that is Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, according to the Hebrew canon. Okay, so the minor prophets now, the minor prophets were actually shorter books from Joel to Malachi, which were actually one scroll. It was all the 12 books were in one scroll. So all these 12 small books made up one scroll, and thus it was called the books of the 12. Okay, it was called the books of the 12. So Old Testament prophetical books can be divided basically into four divisions according to the periods of the time in the history of Israel. So we are going to divide these prophetical books according to their time period where probably these prophets ministered, or the time of these prophets, the ministry of these prophets was. Okay, so we'll divide it into four sections: 8th century, 7th century, exile, and post exile. Okay, so the prophets of the 8th century are Amos, Hosea, Micah, Jonah, and Isaiah. The prophets of the 7th century are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. And then we have the prophets of the exile, that we have Daniel, Ezekiel, and Obadiah. So Daniel is again included because we are doing the English version or the Greek part, Greek version. And then we have the post-exilic prophets, that is Haggai, Zechariah, Joel, and Malachi. Okay, so this was just kind of introduction that we have for the prophetical books. So now we are going to just survey through the prophetical books of the Old Testament. Basically, it is about the background and the terms and the words that are being used. Okay, so who are the prophets? What are the prophets? We're going to talk about those things. Okay, so just to begin with, how do the prophetical prophets begin? Okay, so Samuel was a last judge, as we have already seen. So Samuel was a last judge, and he was a first prophet, and he was also called the seer. He was actually very well known as a seer. If you remember, when Saul was going to look for his donkey, so somebody told him that there is a seer. Okay, so it's not a prophet. He was called a seer. So we have to understand that Samuel was a seer, somebody who sees. Okay, so who could see. So Samuel was the last judge and the prophet and the first prophet, and he was called the seer. So with the advent of the monarchy, that means when monarchy began, we see the rise of these prophets who are going to come and prophesy and speak about the good and the evil. Okay, so God raised prophets to deal with the injustices and the inequalities in the monarchical period. So as the monarchy rose, and as God had already told through Samuel, that there will be a lot of injustice, there will be a lot of corruption, there will be a lot of malfunctioning. The king will do a lot of things for the benefit of himself and acquiring a lot of wealth and horses and army and women and everything. That was already warned by Samuel. So all this started happening with the advent of the kings. So when, as soon as the monarchical period started, all the power rested with one person on the top rather than on all the people at the base. So we can see that all kind of injustices, inequalities, corruption, and every kind of social evil, every kind of religious evil, every kind of wrong things began cropping up. So God raised prophets in these times actually to deal with these kind of injustices and inequalities in the monarchical period. So they were sent by God to the kings, especially, and to the people, and they were the people who would warn and call out and would say that God is saying this, God is saying that, and he's pleased or he is displeased or he is not pleased with the people and he's angry, or anything, that whatever God wants to tell them. So correct to correct the order, or to correct the nation, God sent them. So the prophets' messages were both foretelling and forthtelling. So there are a lot of things to note down as we go through the lecture. So kindly note down all these things. The prophets' messages were foretelling and forthtelling. So many times we only think of a prophet's seeing the future, okay, seeing the future and prophesying about the future. Okay, but that was not the only purpose of the prophets. So many times the prophets may not tell you something that is going to happen in the future as we expect them to do, but they will tell you something that you have that has happened in the previous past of your life, or something that is happening at the present time in your life, or they may just come as a counselor. Okay, so these prophets who had both kind of messages, foretelling and forthtelling. So foretelling part is about the future, when the prophet is when God reveals something to the prophet about the future, and he tells about the future. So that is foretelling. But the forthtelling is he brings forth. He brings forth the messages. That means the present, or the present scenario, or something that has happened in the past, or something that is inside, and you are it is hidden inside, and God wants to reveal that, bring forth that. So we see that foretelling is that kind of prophecy. So you have to understand that almost 70%, okay, 70% of the prophecies was foretelling. It was not foretelling, it was foretelling. Okay, so God was more interested in correcting the lives of the people rather than revealing the future to them. Okay, so the prophets were mainly sent to them with 70% of the message of foretelling of the present and the past, and to correct those things, and little bit of future about the foretelling. Okay, so it was a mix of both foretelling and the foretelling, but the maximum was foretelling, and the less part was foretelling about the future. Okay, so these are the two kinds of prophecies that the prophets did, and God sent them with these kind of messages. Then we have that they had three strands in their messages, which was political, social, and religious. Okay, so these are the three strands of the messages that they had: political, social, and religious. We'll be talking about it in some time again. So then there are three words that were used for a prophet or a seer. Okay, three words that were used for a prophet or a seer in the Hebrew language. First, that was Nabi. Okay, Nabi meaning to call. Okay, Nabi meaning to call. Then we have Roe and Jose. Roe and Jose, both meaning to see. Okay, both mean to see. Okay, so the prophet was someone who was called by God and can see the future. Okay, he was called by God to see the future. So Nabi is to call, Roe and Jose is to see. So they spoke the messages given to them by God, beginning with the words, "This is what the Lord says," or "Thus says the Lord." ये यहोवा की वाणी है, यहोवा यो कहता है. Okay, so these kind of words they used, and they used to say what God is actually telling them to say to the people. So in the Old Testament, there were bands of professional prophets. Okay, so there were even prophets who were actually employed. There was a group of prophets. Okay, group of prophets. So prophets were not only found by Jehovah or sent by Jehovah, but other religions also, and other people also had prophetic kind of ministry, that it would not be called ministry but profession. Okay, so there were bands of official professional prophets who were employed in the court of the kings. Okay, they were employed at the court of the kings, and they were supposed to prophesy and tell the king or advise the king whether they should do this, whether they should do that. So many of the time, before doing anything, the king would tell the prophets, okay, go and inquire from gods, the gods, whoever. Okay, and tell me whether I should do this or I should not do this. So the prophets would go and inquire, or they would just tell the king out of their own wisdom or out of their instincts or anything, and tell the king that no, this is not the way, or this is the way. So many of the times these prophets were professional, and they were worked for their own benefits. So they would always say positive things and never correct the king. Okay, so that was a misuse of the prophetic ministry that was happening at that time also. There were false prophets, a lot of false prophets at that time. Okay, so hence we can see that these prophets prophesied to please their masters. Okay, so most of the Old Testament prophets did not belong to these group of prophets. Okay, they did not belong to these band of prophets or group of prophets, and they mostly opposed them strongly. They were the people, the true prophets whom God sent, Jehovah sent, and they strongly opposed these prophets and these kind of ministries, and they called them as false prophets. Okay, they called them as false prophets. So they were called by Jehovah. These true prophets were called by Jehovah to personally present his message to the people. So God used them as his mouthpiece. Okay, God used them as his mouthpiece. So instead of, God always uses people. God always uses a mode. God always uses a medium. So we have to understand that God sent people to speak. Even today, we are the people who have to evangelize. We're the people who have to share the good news. Okay, so God doesn't use angels in such a way, but God uses people. So God used people who are called prophets, and he sent them with the messages that he wants to speak to the leaders. And they were often, because of this kind of ministry and the truth that they were telling, which was not so positive and not so soothing to the ears of the kings and the people, they attracted a lot of ridicule and persecution. That is why we see a lot of prophets and most of the prophets being ridiculed and persecuted by the kings and the people and also their family members. Okay, so they face a lot of issues, they face a lot of problems in their life just because they were called to do and to say what God had called them to say and do. Okay, let's move on and let's see there are three marks of a genuine prophet. Okay, to say that he's a genuine prophet or a true prophet. So there are three marks of a genuine prophet. First mark is awareness of divine initiative of their call. Okay, so God divinely calls them. It is God who takes the initiative in calling these people as their as his prophets, and they are aware of it. Okay, they are aware of it, that it is that divine initiative that God has called them. Okay, God has called. It is not them who is doing it, it is God who has called them. So it is awareness of the divine initiative of their call. The second one is an experience of divine presence. Okay, so when they were called, it was something very exuberant, it was something very different kind of an experience that they went through. So it was a divine presence. Maybe they saw vision, they heard voice, or they felt, they went into some kind of ecstasy or something happened. Okay, just as we see the scene of Jeremiah, as we see Isaiah, as we see Ezekiel. Okay, so all these people, basically we do not know much about the minor prophets, but these three prophets had distinct experience at the time of their call. So an experience that was divine, that they were found in the presence of God. Okay, and that was that carried them throughout their ministry, that experience, that memory of their experience. Okay, then we can see there is a realization of his own spiritual iniquity or inadequacy. So we can understand when they are aware of the divine initiative. And the second thing is, when they experience the divine presence, automatically they start feeling that they are sinful. Automatically they start feeling that they are nothing before God, they are dirty, they are guilty before God. And then God cleanses them, purifies them, so they realize that they are nothing but an instrument in God's hand. So they realize that spiritually they are extremely dark, extremely dirty. That's what they realize, and God cleanses them. Okay, so these three things are very important, and it is called the three marks of a genuine prophet, which should be found in every prophet. And in one or the other way, it is all mentioned in almost all the prophetical books about the prophet. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to see is a little bit about the history. Okay, so upon Solomon's death, the kingdom was split into two parts. Okay, about after Solomon's death, we know Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Because of them, the kingdom was split into two parts. The northern kingdom of Israel, consisting of 10 tribes, except the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, with Samaria as its capital, built by Omri and Ahab. And then we have the southern kingdom, consisting of two tribes of Judah and Benjamin, with Jerusalem as its capital, ruled by the descendants of David. Okay, so during the 8th century, both the kingdoms prospered economically and politically. 8th century was a very good time for all these kingdoms, and we see that both the kingdoms actually flourished tremendously in the 8th century. But with the flourishing of these kingdoms financially and economically and politically, we see that the gap between the rich and the poor had widened. Okay, so how were these kings becoming rich? How were these elite classes becoming rich? Okay, how were these noble people becoming nobler and more richer? So we can know that they were becoming richer because they were exploiting the poor people. So with the exploitation of the poor people and the corruption and the bribery and everything that was happening in every place or every law place or every offices, we see that the rich are becoming richer and the poor were becoming poor. So the gap was widening. Okay, the gap was widening, and God was very upset with that. Thus, the 8th century prophets actually were the people who called the people back to the covenant with Yahweh. So, the 8th century prophets were mainly giving one message, that they were calling the people back to the covenant with Yahweh. Okay, calling the people back to the covenant with Yahweh. And the priesthood, what was the priesthood doing? The priesthood was emphasizing on the sacrifices in the temple and promising blessings if they carried out the covenant of God, or if they were obedient unto God. So, if they carried out these sacrifices in the temple and fulfilled the rituals in the temple, it was promised that they would be less. Okay, that was how we can see the priests and the prophets were fulfilling their roles or doing their ministry unto the people. Okay, the next thing that we see over here is the prophet's message. Okay, the prophet's message. What were the prophets prophesying about? The prophets are prophesying basically about three things. Okay, so they have three strands in their messages. First is social sins. Okay, the firstly they prophesied about social sin. The social part of life is extremely important for God. Okay, so God, if you see the Old Testament, the prophetical books, you will understand that God is more interested in how we deal with each other, how one person is dealing with the other person, because it reflects the nature and the character of God. Okay, so first thing that the people, the first strand or that prophets were prophesying about was the social sins. And the social sins consisted of the injustice to the poor, the corruption, the injustice to the poor, the inequality, the injustice to the poor. The second strand was political sins, and political sins consisted of alliances with the foreign powers instead of trusting in Yahweh. So God wanted the kings and the kingdom to trust in God instead of making alliances with Egypt or Assyria or Babylon, okay, or holding on the hands of another powerful kingdom to fight another powerful kingdom. So God wanted them to trust Yahweh, who is the creator of everything, and God will be with them. So instead of having trusting God, they would make alliances with the foreign power. That was political sins. The third strand is religious sins. Okay, third strand is religious sin. Now, what is religious sins? Religious sins was apostasy and idolatry. So there was hypocrisy, there was idolatry. So people were just showing off that they are very religious, but internally they were far away from God. So they were doing all the sacrifices and doing all the rituals, doing all the festivals and feasts and everything. But we see that internally they were far, far, far away from God, and they were also getting involved into a lot of idolatry. Okay, so this was a problem, and then we see that these are the three strands that are very important. That was the message of the Old Testament prophets, especially of the 8th century, even continued after that. Okay, so at the time of the 8th century, Assyria was the leading power of both. Assyria was Assyria was the leading power, and both Israel and Judah had become its vassal states. Okay, so had become their tributaries, or it had become their vassal states. So they were under Assyria, and they had to pay tributes to Assyria, gifts and tributes to Assyria for everything. Then we see that towards the end of the 8th century, the northern kingdom, that is Israel, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, they fell to Assyrian kingdom. Okay, they fell to the Assyrian kingdom, but Judah remained. Okay, Judah stood alone, and it was threatened greatly by the power of Assyria. Gradually, we see towards the 7th century, the Babylonian kingdom entered, the Babylonian empire entered, and it destroyed Assyrian kingdom, and it became the leading power. So now Babylonian kingdom became the leading power in the 7th century. Okay, so now gradually we see now when Babylonian kingdom becomes the superpower at that time, gradually it's going to wage war, or it's going to attack, or it's going to take Judah into captivity. Okay, so the different issues and the power structures actually showed a change in the prophecies of the 8th century and the 7th century prophets. So according to the political scenario, according to the social scenario, according to the kingdoms, according to the situations throughout the world, the message of the prophets kept changing. Okay, so that's what we saw about the background, or the kind of, in short, the historical background, or some important terms that we had to see about the prophets and their prophetical books. Okay, now let's just go ahead and enter into the book of Isaiah. Okay, so let's start with the book of Isaiah. So Isaiah is the first book in the prophets section of the Old Testament. Okay, it is one of the most important book in size as well as its message. So its position is very well deserved. So it is one of the important books, and we all know that Isaiah, we all consider first name that comes to our mind when we talk of prophets is Isaiah. Okay, so it is one of the most important book in size as well as its message. So its position is, well, it is the first book. Okay, so it is importantly placed and very properly placed, as we can understand. Okay, the next thing that we can see is about Isaiah. We'll see about Isaiah as a prophet, as a person. So Isaiah was the son of Amos, which we can see in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1. He must not be confused with the prophet Amos. Okay, so we should not think that prophet Amos is his father, but he was the son of Amos, another person which is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 1. So, an old Jewish tradition states that Isaiah was related to the royal family of Judah. Okay, Isaiah was related to the royal family of Judah and was possibly the cousin of King Uzziah, though the Bible is silent about it. So we do not know properly, but it is said that probably he belonged to a royal family of Judah and he was the cousin of King Uzziah. So the name, his name, let us look at his name. So his name, Isaiah, meant salvation of the Lord. Okay, the salvation of the Lord. He lived in the city of Jerusalem in the 8th century BC. Okay, he lived in the city of Jerusalem in the 8th century BC. He was married and had two sons. Okay, he was married and had two sons, which and their names and all everything is mentioned in chapter 7 and chapter 8, verse 3. Isaiah chapter 6 talks about his call, which is during the at the time of the death of King Uzziah, which is around 740 BC. Okay, he prophesied for around 40 years, beginning at the time of the death of King Uzziah through the reigns of Jotham, who was a godly man like his father. Then we have Ahaz, one of the worst kings of Judah, and that was the longest period where he was prophesying. It was the most difficult time when Isaiah was prophesying until the 14th year of Hezekiah. So we said Hezekiah was a good king and godly king. So from 740 to 701 BC, that is 40 years, he was prophesying. He knew that his message will not be received positively by the audience, but the traditions also tell us that he was so much disliked or hated by the king, especially by Manasseh, that we see that he had sawed him, he killed him, he sawed him into two, he was cut, Isaiah was cut into two or sawed into two and martyred during the reign of King Manasseh, who was a king, who was a son of King Hezekiah, a wicked king. So Manasseh was a wicked king, but Hezekiah was a very good king. Okay, so Isaiah was the contemporary of the northern prophet Hosea. Now let's look at the book, okay, book of Isaiah. So according to the Jewish tradition, the book is completely credited to Isaiah's authorship, but still we have a lot of discrepancies in the authorship of the book. Okay, so it is also called the Gospel of Isaiah many times. So the main theme of Isaiah's message is the salvation of the Lord. Okay, according as his name suggests, salvation of the Lord, which is also the meaning of his name. So apart from the book of Psalms, Isaiah is the most frequently quoted book in the New Testament from the Old Testament. Okay, so Psalms has been quoted. We know that Psalms is quoted so much in the New Testament, but we see the second most quoted book from the Old Testament is Isaiah, which is quoted so much or so often in the New Testament. Okay, and even Jesus read from the book of Isaiah and Luke. Okay, so let's move ahead and let's see the book. Actually, is an anthology. Okay, it's a book. It's an anthology of Isaiah's prophecies, which was collected over a period of his long ministry, 40 years of ministry. We see that Isaiah had, and throughout his ministries, he spoke a lot of oracles. He prophesied a lot of things. So we see that this book is an anthology of all of Isaiah's prophecies that were collected throughout his ministerial period. So it is arranged in two volumes. Volume 1 is divided into 4 units and volume 2 is divided into 3 units. Let's look at volume 1 first. Volume 1, the first unit, Isaiah chapter 1 verse 1 to chapter 12 verse 6, it contains oracles of judgment and hope. Okay, so which talks about the spiritual condition of Israel and Judah, which is characterized by idolatry, empty religiosity, and social oppression. And it also talks about the call of Isaiah. The second unit is from Isaiah 13, verse 1 to 23, verse 18, and it talks about the oracles against nations, and it consists of condemnation of Israel's enemies, and he foretells of its destruction. Then the unit 3 is from Isaiah 24, verse 1 to Isaiah 27, verse 3. This is an eschatological judgment and triumph. And here he's talking about God's judgment and hope for the surrounding nations. And then we have the fourth unit, that is Isaiah 28, verse 1 to 33, verse 24. It talks about the oracles of judgment against Jerusalem and Egypt. And here he warns Jerusalem against turning to Egypt for help and concludes with a picture of an era with God as its king. The second volume, let's look into the second volume. The second volume has three parts, as we said. So, unit 5, that is the first part of the second unit, Isaiah 34, verse 1 to 35, verse 10. It is eschatological judgment and blessings. It describes an age where Israel will truly follow God and other nations will know God through Israel. That is a very important thing. Then we see the next unit, that is the sixth unit, Isaiah 36, verse 1 to 39, verse 8. It is an historical bridge. Okay. Here he mentions Assyria's unsuccessful campaign against Jerusalem at the time of Hezekiah. If you remember, Hezekiah's illness and his recovery, the visit of envoys from Babylon, and then he concludes with exile to Babylon. Okay, how they will go into exile Babylon. Okay, so then we have the last unit, that is the unit 7, and here we have Isaiah chapter 40, verse 1 to Isaiah chapter 66, verse 24, and it contains the oracles of consolation. This has again three parts. The first part talks about Judah's release from Babylon through Syria. So this is about the future. Okay, Judah's release from Babylon through Cyrus. Then we have the second part, which contains the three most beautiful servant songs, and then part 3, we have the image of restored Jerusalem and a time when God will extend his salvation to the whole world. Okay, so the concept of Isaiah was the whole world, that God's salvation is for the whole world, not only for Israel. Okay, so now let's move ahead and let's talk about the authorship, which is a very complicated concept in the book of Isaiah. So let's look at this now. So the mirror images, we see that there are a lot of mirror images that are seen in the book of Isaiah. So there are two parts basically for that, the first half and the second half. Okay, so the Christian critical scholars vary in their opinion of single authorship, and they talk of it as being two or three separate books with separate authors. So what do they say? So under this view, the division of the book varies and can be divided into three parts. The first one is Proto Isaiah. Okay, Proto Isaiah, which is Isaiah chapter 1 to chapter 39. And they say that this was written by this Isaiah of Jerusalem, who we are talking about right now. So he is the author, who he is from Jerusalem. And it was against the background of Assyria. That means at that time the Assyrian rule was going on. So it was Assyrian background, political background. Then we have the second part, that is Deutero Isaiah, which is from chapter 40 to 55, and it was considered to be written by an anonymous prophet whose name is not mentioned, and it was because it has a Babylonian political background to it. Okay, so it is written in a political background which is Babylonian. Okay, so this background is different from the first part. So now we have the third part, that is Trito Isaiah, which is from 56 to 66 of the chapters of Isaiah, and here also it has been written by an anonymous prophet, name is not known, and this is about after the exile. So in this book we can see three periods. Okay, Assyrian background, we can see Babylonian background, and we can see the exile. So that is the problem, and Isaiah was not alive throughout. Isaiah was only alive through the first part, as we can see. Okay, so that's difficult to understand how he can be the author of all the three parts. So the main criticism by the critical scholars seems to be that how could Isaiah have predicted the events that occurred long after his death, especially about the fall of Babylon to Cyrus of Persia and the return of the remnants to the promised land with so much detail and accuracy. Okay. Prophesying is a different thing, but with so much precision, with so much accuracy, with so much detailing, with names, proper names, and everything. How can somebody prophesy with so much details? Okay, that was a big question among the critical scholars. So the question therefore arises that can God reveal the future with so much clarity in such detailed manner through this prophet? That is a big question that arose in the minds of the critical scholars, that can God reveal the future with so much clarity and in so much depth and detailed manner through his prophets? So that was a big question which the critical scholars were dealing with. But the NIV Study Bible actually supports many of the scholars, along with the NIV Study Bible, they support single authorship of the book. They don't support the three authorship of the book, but they support the single authorship, that Isaiah traditionally, as it is said, wrote the whole book. Okay, so the reasons that they give is that only Isaiah's name is connected with the book. Okay, only Isaiah's name is connected with the book. We can see in chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 2, verse 1, chapter 13, verse 1. Then we see that the second reason is the title, the Holy One of Israel. Okay, this has been given by Isaiah. So it has been used by Isaiah for God, and it occurs 12 times in chapters 1 to 39, and then 14 times in chapters 36 to 66. But outside the book of Isaiah, it appears only 6 times. Okay, so now the next reason that they give is there are many other striking parallels between chapters 1 to 39 and 40 to 66. This is the mirror image that we are talking about, and this confirms the mirror image, that is chapter 1 verse 2 is in a mirror image to chapter 66 verse 24. Chapters 1 verse 5 to 6 is in mirror image with 53 verses 4 to 5. Chapter 5 verse 27 is a mirror image of 40 verse 30. Chapter 6 verse 1 is a mirror image of 52, 13, and 57, 15. So on, as you can see the list mentioned away. It's a mirror image, as we can see, and that is why they say the author is the same. Okay. The next reason that they give is around 25 Hebrew words or forms are found in the book of Isaiah that are not found in any other prophetic writing. So it has to be one author. Then Isaiah uses fire as a figure of punishment, a judgment or punishment. That is, the verses are mentioned for your references. Okay, so Isaiah was the person who used fire as the figure of speech for punishment. Then we have the sixth reason, that is recurring theme of holy mountain of Jerusalem, which is mentioned in chapter 2 verse 4 and quite often 2 to verse 4. And then the highway to Jerusalem, which is mentioned in 11:16, is used quite often throughout the book of Isaiah. So this recurring theme tells us that probably this is the same author that wrote the whole book. Then we have the seventh reason, that is the structure of the book also supports its unity. The whole structure of the book states and actually cries out for unity. Chapters 36 to 39 form, it is in between, in the middle, and they form as the historical interlude to the first section. Okay, to the concluding part of the first section, that is chapters 1 to 39, and then it introduces the second section, that is chapters 40 to 60. The eighth reason, which is the additional one, okay, that is New Testament authors quote scripture verses from all over the book of Isaiah, which means they accepted that Isaiah is the single author of the book. They don't have any other person in mind, but they think that Isaiah is the author and they quote scriptures from his book. Okay, so these are the 8 reasons that we have for single authorship. Okay, let's move ahead. If Isaiah, giving reasons and proving this again single authorship of the book, if Isaiah did not write the second part of the book, which is due to Isaiah, then who wrote these beautiful servant songs? That also without credit. So the servant songs are the most beautiful part of the book of Isaiah. So if not Isaiah, who wrote it? And he has not even mentioned his name. So it is injustice to credit Isaiah with the 7 songs if he has not written. And this is the most beautiful section of the book of Isaiah. Okay, the message of the book is also theological in theme, that is the Holy One of Israel. It talks about the Holy One of Israel. So it reveals the judgment of the Holy God against the rebellious Israel who were unfaithful towards his covenant. So judgment of a holy God on a rebellious Israel who were unfaithful towards his covenant. Yet his name Isaiah, which is also happens to be the theme of the book, is the hope or the ray of salvation for the Israel, not only for Israel, but for all the nations around the world. So God will bring salvation to the whole world. That is what is believed by Isaiah and spoken in his book. So God is sovereign and he is above all. God is sovereign and he is above all. The book looks forward not only to the return of Israel, but to the messianic age of peace and safety. So it's not only up till the return of Israel, but it is also looking forward many, many, many years forward to the messianic age of peace and safety, which is still not come. It is towards the end of the age. That is the end of the world, the age of peace and safety. That is the messianic age. So that's what we were talking about the book of Isaiah. Now let's quickly move into the survey of the book of Jeremiah. Okay, so the book is named after the prophet who was the Lord's main messenger to Judah and the surrounding nations from 627 to 580 BC. So he was the prophet to Judah, okay, to Judah and the nations around it in 625 BC to 580 BC. So let's look about Jeremiah. Jeremiah appears in the scene about 100 years after Isaiah. So Isaiah has already gone, died, and after that 100 years have passed, and Jeremiah appears on the scene as a prophet. He was born into a priestly family at Anathoth or Anata, a few miles from Jerusalem in 650 BC. God called him to be a prophet in 627 BC. So the Assyrian power was fading at that time, and the Babylonian power was rising at that time. So Assyrians were falling, and Babylon was rising. So he prophesied for 40 years. He also prophesied for 40 years during the reigns of the last five kings of Judah. Okay, and Jeremiah prophesied and warned of the disaster and appealed the nation to repent and turn back to God, but all was in vain. So Jeremiah was weeping and crying and warning the people of the coming desire. His heart was paining for his people, but the people would not listen to his appeals, and the nation would not repent and would not turn back to God. And all his prophecies just fell to the ground. And only when everything happened, when they went into judgment, when they went into captivity, then they realized that yes, Jeremiah was a true prophet. Till that time, they were listening to all their, false prophets and just being carried away by the good news that they were bringing and peace, peace, peace that they were saying. But they were not listening to the warnings of Jeremiah. But only when they were attacked and when were taken into captivity, that time they realized, yes, Jeremiah was the true prophet. He was telling the truth, and these were the rest were the false prophets. And that time he gained little respect among the people, but it was too late. So let's look at the book of Jeremiah. His book, which grew from a scroll, it turned into a book from a scroll, and this scroll was actually dictated by Jeremiah to Baruch. Okay, Baruch is his scribe. So Jeremiah dictated his prophecies and everything to Baruch, who was his scribe, who wrote it down. So it is a glorious mixture. It is a wonderful mixture of literary forms of prose and poetry. So Jeremiah uses a lot of poetry in his book. He uses taunts, he uses laments, he acted out the parables, he acted out his prophecies. He has biography in the book telling about himself, and then he has the story history. He also talks about the history also. So there is a lot of things, a lot of different kind of mixture of literary items in this book. It's a mixture. Okay, and then we see that the material, though everything is there in it, prose, poetry, taunts, laments, parables, and biography and history, everything is there in this, and Baruch has written everything down. Yet we see that it is not recorded in chronological order. Though history is there, but it is not recorded in a chronological order. But it is just against themes. Okay, themes. So it makes it difficult for us to understand the chronology, or the set the right background at the right place in the book of Jeremiah, because it is all up and down. It is all events. It is all themes. That is according to which it is assimilated, or according to which it is designed or arranged. So his oracles are thus arranged thematically rather than chronologically, which makes it difficult to understand what happened before and what happened later on. Okay, his book is actually a collection of three books. Okay, his book is actually a collection of three books with two biographical sections and a historical appendix. So the book one is from Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 1 to chapter 25 verse 38. It is the basic collection of prophecies. So here we have the collection of oracles stating the sins of Judah and describing the forces from the north that will execute justice upon the nation. Then we have the nation, the name of the foe. Okay, the name of the foe is identified and named, and towards the end of the section, it is called Babylon. And then we have Jeremiah's personal confessions that are distributed throughout the book, and expressing his deep emotional frustrations for the ministry for which he has been called, and he is known as weeping prophet. So because he was so wounded and his family had left him, his family had just abandoned him, and the family was against him, people were against him, king was against him, everybody was against him, and his ministry was so painful for him. And that is why he would just mediate for the people and intercede for the people, and he would weep upon himself, upon his ministry, and he would weep for the people. So most of the time he was found weeping. That is why he was called a weeping prophet. The book after the book one, we see there is a section where the first biographical interlude is given, Jeremiah 26 verse 1, 29 verse 32. Here we see here the details of his trial, conflict with Hananiah the prophet, and his letter to the exiles in Babylon. The next section is book 2, and Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 1 to 31, verse 30. This is a book of consolation. It is composed mostly of in poetic style. It's a poetic styled poem book section at this time, and it describes the restoration of Judah. So it's talking about the future. That's why it's in a poetical style now. Okay, so Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 1 to 45, verse 5 is a second biographical interlude. And he talks about the events surrounding the siege and the fall of Jerusalem. Then we have the third section, that is book 3, Jeremiah 46, verse 1 to 51, verse 64. Here the oracles against the nations are mentioned. Okay, the oracles against the nations and defense of his reputation as a prophet to the nations is mentioned in this section. Lastly, we have the historical appendix in chapter 52, verse 1 to 34. Here, more details about the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem is given. Okay, next we'll just move ahead in this, and we see his message. So he preached the message of judgment and destruction for Israel's idolatry. So he was so much against idolatry, and he preached about idolatry so much. And he preached the message was literally, it was like, because of the idolatry of Israel, God is condemning and taking the people into judgment. Okay, that's what main message as we can see. So he preached the message of hope also. Okay, he preached about their coming back after 70 years. So he promised that God would allow the exiles to return after a period of 70 years. This is the only prophet. Jeremiah is the only prophet who mentions around after 70 years the people are going to come back and God is going to bring them back. He does not stop at the judgment, gives them hope that after 70 years they are going to come back. So God would establish a new covenant with them. God is going to establish a new covenant with them, a covenant written on tablets of flesh, not on tablets of stone. So till now, this covenant was written on the tablet of stone, the 10 commandments, but now it will be on heart, the flesh, okay, heart, or the tablets of flesh. So now when they come back, there'll be a new covenant, and God will write his covenant on our hearts rather than on stone tablets. So this is the book of Jeremiah in short, as a survey. So let's move into the second part, or we can see the book of Lamentation, which is also associated with the name of Jeremiah. So this we'll take a survey of the book of Lamentations now. So the book is a series of funeral laments. Okay, funeral laments or dirges for Jerusalem, composed after the destruction of the city by the Babylonian army in 587 BC. So it was basically written after the city was destroyed and burnt down by the Babylonian army in 587 BC. And it's like the city has died. It's like city has died and somebody is lamenting over the death of the city. Let's talk about the title. So it originally has no title. Okay, there is no title given to it. The book was titleless, but as the practice of the Jews, the first word of the book was taken as a title. The first word was Eka. Okay, Eka, or how. How. Okay, how could this happen? Okay, so this is the title. So how was the first word, so it became the title of the book. In Hebrew, this is a special word used to express grief in the funeral songs. So if you know a little bit about the Hebrew culture, if somebody died or something bad happened, the people would come and they would cry and they would just keep asking questions. How could this happen? How such a good man would die? How such a bad fate for the good person? And how? So many questions they would cry and they would ask. So this was a common format at that time to express the grief during the funeral songs. Okay, so this word is used in the first verse of Lamentations, and verse chapter 1 and 2 and 4 also, showing that the book is a book of funeral songs. The book contains funeral songs, songs of mourning over the death of the city of Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem has died and a funeral has taken place, and this song is coming up as a funeral song of the death of the city. Okay, so in LX6 or Septuagint, the Greek word that is used here is threnoi. This is also funeral song or elegies, which was used as the title in the Greek language or Septuagint, Trinoi. Okay, then we have in the Latin version that similar word is used, that is Treni. Okay, Treni or funeral song. So all over you have to understand it is Treni, Trinoi or Eka. It all means funeral songs. Okay, funeral songs, sad songs, funeral songs, mourning songs. Okay, and English also it has lamentations. That means you lament over somebody's death. That is what the main idea of the title is. Let's talk about the authorship. The author is actually unknown. Okay, the Hebrew version does not mention Jeremiah, but some of the copies of Septuagint, okay, Septuagint, Greek Septuagint, have added an introduction to the book of Lamentation, and it says, and it came to pass that after Israel had been carried into captivity in Jerusalem and had been laid to waste, that Jeremiah sat weeping and lamented with his lamentation over Jerusalem and said, के बाद the whole book of Lamentation starts in the poetical form. So Hebrew version does not have any kind of name associated with it, any kind of introduction, but this Greek version, the Septuagint, has added this thing as introductory part, which says that Jeremiah sat down, wept, and wrote these laments. Okay, so tradition states that Jeremiah had written a lament about the death of Josiah. Okay, so he has already written a lament on the death of Josiah, Second Chronicles chapter 35 verse 25, and those who translated this book seems to assume that it contained Jeremiah's laments, hence it placed along with the prophecy of Jeremiah. Okay, though the Hebrew scriptures do not place it in the, but the Hebrew scriptures actually place it in the writing section. So Hebrew scriptures do not know who has written, so they have placed it in the writing section and canonize it later on. But due to the LXX and all these things and the translation done for the lament of Josiah and all these things, so they feel that it is similar to the lament that was done for Josiah, and they feel that probably this is the same person who has written this lament also, and they have, that is why they have placed it along the book of Jeremiah. But you have to understand that Hebrew scriptures do not have any name associated with it. Okay, let's move ahead. The first four poems are definitely written by an eyewitness of the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian army in 587 BC. So somebody who has seen the whole destruction happening with his own eyes, the eyewitness has written the first four poems of Lamentations. Okay, so though the writer was familiar with the times and the writings of Jeremiah, does not mean that he would be the writer. It can be somebody else also living at that time. So for the people of Judah, the fall of Jerusalem was not only the destruction of the capital city, but it was much more, because it was a city of God. Okay, Jerusalem was the city of God where God dwelt. His temple was there, temple was situated over there, and he chose to dwell among his people in the city of Jerusalem. So the death of the city of Jerusalem, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, simply means that the presence of God has gone. The presence of God has gone. That's what it simply meant for them. It was not only the capital city being destroyed, but the presence of God moving away from that place, because the city belonged to God. So when the city was burnt down, the temple was destroyed, and the people deported, it meant that God has abandoned them into the hands of their enemy. So they felt that because of their sin and because of the things that they have committed and done, God has actually abandoned them and giving them into the hands of the enemies to do whatever they want to do with the people of Israel or Judah. So these laments express the poet's grief that God had rejected his people because of their sin. Okay, because of their sin, God has rejected the people. So the book makes no comment of hope for the future. So this book is hopeless, means there is no hope in the book for the future, and the author does not mention any kind of hope, give any hope, and he simply says that it is because of the sin of the people that God has left and judged the people. So it was written before Cyrus. Okay, so Cyrus आने से पहले लिखा गया because Cyrus was the person who actually returned the people, told the people to return. Because there is no hope simply means that it was before the time of Cyrus who freed them. Okay, so this is another reason why Jeremiah may not be the author. Okay, so let's move ahead and we'll look at the structure of the book. So the book consists of 5 separate poems contained in separate chapters. There are 5 chapters and there are 5 separate poems. The first 4 have the rhythm of a dirge, okay, and were written in acrostic, with each each verse beginning with the Hebrew alphabet in order. So acrostic was a very complicated style of writing. Just to give you an example, what happens in acrostic poem. Uh, just example, the Hebrew language alphabets goes by Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, and so like that. Okay. So according to that, the first verse will begin with Aleph. Okay. The first word of the verse begins with the alphabet Aleph. The second verse begins with Bet. The third verse, Gimel. Fourth verse with Dalet. Okay, so just like that, like first was beginning with A, second was beginning with B, and the third was beginning with C, some word with C. The fourth was beginning with some word with D. The fifth word beginning with some word with E. So something like that till Z it will go. Okay, and till Zion it will go for Hebrew poetry. So there are 22 alphabets in the Hebrew language, and there are 22 verses. So each verse begins in the continuous order of the alphabet. So that is acrostic style. It is very difficult and complicated. So when you read in the English or the Hindi or whatever version you have, you will not get the idea of the acrostic style of poem writing. Okay, so that's how it was written, and that is why it's so beautiful. Beautifully written laments in poems, that is chapters 1, 2, and 4. We have 22 verses beginning with the acrostic style, that is Hebrew alphabet style in order. Then we have poem 3, and it has 3 verses for each alphabet. So verse 1, 2, 3 beginning with Aleph, then 4, 5, 6 beginning with Bet, 6, 7, 8, 9 Dalet or Gimel. Okay, so just like that. So 333 verses beginning with the same alphabet, and that makes it 66 verses in all in the third poem of the Lamentations. Then we have the fifth poem that also has 22 verses, but it is not neither dirge nor an acrostic. It is simply expressed. Okay. So these poems are still read aloud in the Jewish synagogues in the mid of July. Okay, so in July, the coming month, as we can see, every July they read these laments aloud in the Jewish synagogues to mark the anniversary of the destruction of the temple in 587 BC, and also remembering the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD. So it is basically to remember the destruction of the first as well as the second temple in the 70 AD and 587 BC. So let's look at this division of the book. There are 5 divisions according to the 5 chapters. So Lamentation 1 talks about Jerusalem mourning for her destruction. Then we have Lamentation 2. Here there is a national lament over the fall of Jerusalem. Lamentation 3 is a personal lament. Lamentation 4 is a national lament over the fall of Jerusalem. And then we have Lamentation 5, a prayer for deliverance. Okay, towards the end, let's see what basically is the message or what is there in the book. Okay, so the book, let's look at the message. So the message is basically, it's like a question and answer. So the book was an answer to the urgent questions of the people of Judah. So the people of Judah were asking how, so many questions they were asking, and the book seems to be an answer for all of that. So they were asking, how could God allow his city to be destroyed? How could God allow his royal line of kings to be defeated? How could God allow his temple to be destroyed? So these were the various questions and many more. They were just asking, how could God do this with his city, his people, his king, his chosen generation to his temple? So how? So many hows. God, how could God do that? And God simply answers. God answers, it was due to the sins of the people. It was due to the sins of the people that God had to do this. Lamentation 1, verse 8, 9, and 18. Then the second answer is God's anger led him to hand them over to their enemies. Lamentation 2, verses 2 to 8. But he is merciful, and so there was hope for the future. Lamentation 3, verse 31 to 33. Then, lastly, what he requires from his people. What does he require from his people? It was repentance. Lamentation 3, verse 40 to 42 and 55 to 58. Then he would overthrow their enemies. So, if the people would repent and obey, God would overthrow his enemies, which is mentioned in chapter 3, verse 64 to 66. But the problem was people were not repenting. They were not ready to repent. If they repented, God would overthrow his enemies, their enemies. So the book basically ends with less confidence as the writer of the final poem fears. Okay, towards the end, the author or the writer of the poem is fearful that his people's sin might have led God to reject them fully and finally. Lamentation chapter 5, verses 19 to 22. So we see over here that the author or the writer simply is so fearful of the future because he feels that probably the sin was so great, the sin was so bad that God has completely and fully rejected and finally rejected them, and God is not going to take them back after that. So he's just given up on them. He's not going to take them back again. Okay, so this is the book of Lamentation. Okay, so I know that this lecture was a little longer, but it was all connected. So we had to do it together. Okay, so I hope these lectures are helpful to you. I also request you all to kindly listen carefully, important points to be noted down, jotted down, make notes, and then some learn from these books for your exams and also for your personal understanding and studies. Thank you, and may God bless you with all these studies that we are having. Take care.